Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We are presenting today on making use of our EOG and EOC reports. Now, before I go there, Julie is recording this session, so just in case there's anybody who wanted to listen to the session or you want to share it with anyone, you can always go back. The recording will be posted after the presentation has ended. Now, today with me, I have Brian Sumner. I'm Serena Halstead, and I also have Julie here today to present with me.
So before we get started, let's check in and see how many of these reports that we have here that you're familiar with. And you can drop that information in the chat. How many of you are familiar with the score rosters, the goal summaries, the frequency reports, and the individual student reports? All right, so it looks like most of you are.
So for our objectives today, we are going to be, most of you are familiar with the reports, but we are definitely going to give a run through of the reports. So we're going to identify the different types of reports for the end of grade and end of course assessments. And then we're also going to look at interpreting the reports, as well as we're going to look at how data in these reports, how to use, what questions can we ask when looking at these reports, and then also determine some other questions or other information that we may need to have when we're looking at these reports and when we're thinking about even making decisions after looking at the information in these reports.
So most of the reports that I'm going to talk about, they're generated from the state software, like the score rosters, the goal summaries, and the frequency reports all come from the state scanning and scoring software. The individual student reports we download from a state server. So all of those, and then also one of the things that's new about the individual student reports is there are some that are going to be populated in directly into PowerSchool this year. So I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to that slide. So the score rosters are the reports that we generally provide whenever we download test scores. Those and the goal summaries and the frequency reports can all be found in FIFO, which not all teachers have access to FIFO. The principal may request that teachers have access to FIFO, and it's at the principal's discretion. But all the reports that we work with that we're talking about just now, all of those get loaded directly into FIFO. And to get to FIFO, you would first go to OASIS, like you log into the Wake ID portal, and then you would click on OASIS. And then from there, you would go to the files in and files out. That's what FIFO stands for, is files in, files out. And then you would go to the various report that you're looking for. Like at the top, you would select your school and then what category you're looking for, and then the year. This is FIFO is now, it's been our quicker replacement that we've used for a couple of years now. So let's talk about when those reports are getting released. The score rosters get released either immediately after the answer sheet has been scanned, or the following day for an online score. So most of the testing that we do, if we do it, scan a paper and pencil answer sheet, we provide the test coordinator or whoever brings in the answer sheet a score immediately after we complete scanning and clean up all the information. And then there's some other, those get passed back to teachers and school administrators and stuff. We do post everything back in FIFO at night, and then in the morning, we download the scores from the state software and then post them in FIFO as well. So it's either, depending on the type of score it is, whether it's online or paper and pencil, it's either immediately or the following day. The goal summaries and the frequency reports we're not able to run those until after everybody's completed testing, and we do post those in FIFO as well. So the teachers and the school administrators and the district personnel have access to those. We also, at the same time that we're doing the school goal summaries and frequency reports, we do a district goal summary and frequency report as well. And those are posted in a slightly different place. Instead of the school file, those are placed in FIFO. Those go in the district place in FIFO. And then the individual student reports, we post those in July. And I'll talk a little bit more and show you a little bit more about why we do that, the way that we do it. But those individual student reports, they are sent home directly to parents, either through PowerSchool or by mail. And then we also post copies in FIFO as well, in case a school has a need to go out and grab those, like if a family doesn't have access to technology or something like that. So those are, we do post a copy of those as well in FIFO. So let's talk a little bit about the rosters that you guys may receive. This is an example of a grade 6 math roster, but there's a similar roster for Read to Achieve, any EOG, and the EOCs and the Extend 1. So we get a similar roster for most of the tests that are state assessments. The first item that you can tell from, or the first part of note, is you get a roster of all the student names depending on how the answer sheets came through. So over here on the left-hand side under student name, we've got the names blurred out. But the first thing that you can tell from this roster is the name and who completed the test. So the next part that we're going to note is, I believe, the number of items attempted. Yeah, how many items did the student answer? And you see here that some of the students are considered absent from makeup for testing purposes, and that shows that they didn't complete any items. So that would explain why there's a blank out next to that student name. And then over here on the farther right, you've got what achievement level the student earned. So that tells you what score each student earned. One thing to note is that a student who's absent does not get any score at all. It's just like they were not present for testing. So they're not penalized for individually for being absent. And Serena is going to talk a little bit about the goal summaries.
Sure. So the goal summary, as it mentioned, goals. So there are some standards that students have to complete in each courses. Take, for example, English language arts. So English language arts, the broad goals are reading for literature, reading for information, and also language arts comprehension. Now, these goals, they're further broken down into the various standards that the teachers teach throughout the year. And so what you'll see on the goal summary report is what percentage of items that are aligned to each of the goals that are represented on the test. So where you're seeing here 20 to 24% of the items are aligned to the English language arts concept, and you can see the breakdown of it all. And so for the grade 3 EOG, you're seeing that most of the questions, like 41 to 45% of the items, are aligned to that goal. And so the students are taking more questions than that in that test. Also, you will also see the average performance of the students. And this average that we're looking at the difference in how they scored compared to other teachers within the grade taking that assessment. So you look at different goal summary reports or different teachers at the grade level, and you will see the numbers varying, but this is the average of how the students are performing. And then also we have the differences. So this difference here, you'll notice that you'll see, like, for example, a negative, or you might see a positive. And this difference simply relates to how the students also, let me go back on that one. So the difference here, it displays the performance relative to the norming year that the state percent mean was. I believe our norming year, or reading, for example, the test has been renormed. So you will not be seeing 2013, you'll see the most current norming year for this test. Now, negative values indicate a score performance below the state mean, while a positive value, if you're seeing a positive number, for example, 2.1, 2.7, that indicates a performance that is above the state mean.
And here you have a frequency report. And the frequency report basically shows a lot of the averages for like how students do as far as scale scores, the frequency that each student scores at each scale score. So like if you, what is the next highlight, Julie? So how many students earn the same scale score and achievement level? So like if a student had a scale score of 566, we see that we only had one student that scored quite that high. With that particular frequency, and then it breaks down among, I mean, not the that it breaks down basically how students did with that particular scale score. There's also a scale median, a low score and a high score, and then it also has the, what was the next one, Julie? The scale score mean, and then also the standard deviation in the mode. So it kind of gives you an idea of what that report shows. And now we'll talk a little bit about the individual student reports. And these are available in July, around about July. We try and get them home as soon as we possibly can. But if you go to the next slide. So here's an example of what the report looks like. I'm going to highlight the first, it tells you what test the student completed, like the grade 3 end of grade test for this particular one, but you'll get one for each end of grade test and each end of course test. And then it talks about the achievement level and what it gives a little bit of additional information about what that specific achievement level means for that particular student. And then over on the right-hand side, you've got the school average and the district average. Those numbers are live based on the results that we send up to the state server. So the school average, if we were to run an individual student report for students on the first day of testing, that would be based on that number of students that tested on that particular day. And then as more students test throughout the testing window, that number will fluctuate. So you can imagine, like with a year-round school, if they have track 1 students that start earlier and they test early and earlier than tracks 2 through 4, that number could change quite a bit. The same is true for the district average. Right now, we've got some modified schools that have started testing. So the district average, if we produce these, would reflect just the district average for those modified schools. And then as we progress through our district testing window, that district average will change depending on how many schools finish. So really, the only time that we can run these is we have schools testing right up until the end of June. So we have to run them in July so that we can produce accurate reports for families. So that gives you an idea of why we do things the way that we do. This will be the first year for middle and high schools that we send the individual student reports directly into PowerSchool. There's an English and a Spanish translation that gets populated into PowerSchool for those families, and we'll be sending out directions for how families can get that information. But for elementary schools, the parent portal is not turned on yet, so we will be sending paper individual student reports home to the families in elementary schools. And we hope to get those out sometime around the middle of July, depending on how long it takes to print everything and get everything formatted the right way. It may get closer to the end of July and early August, but our goal is to try and get these out as fast as we can in July. And I'm going to let Julie talk about the EOG and EOC reports that are a little kind of additional things that we do.
Thanks, Brian and Serena. So we just walked through some of the reports that Brian's office is able to generate through the state systems, but we also do a few things for you here at the Data Research and Accountability Office. So let me get on the right screen. So I just wanted to give you a timeline on that. I think you're familiar with some of these reports that we generate and put in FIFO. They have a chart of the performance, and then we also have bar graphs that represent different school versus district, et cetera. So we're looking to do the preliminary school level EOG and EOC results without the summer program results probably the week after your school lets out. So we'll be staggering those about depending on when your schedules are over, what calendar you're on, but we're looking at about the week after that. It's important to note that these don't have any of the accountability rules attached to it. This is just straight up aggregation of what has gone through the state system that Brian has uploaded. Now, of course, if we have a district average and you're a school that gets out before the other schools, as Brian just noted, we don't hang on to these until July because I know everyone's curious about it. So we will be producing these the week after your school lets out without summer program scores. And then in mid-July, we'll do a aggregate report, again, without the accountability rules, just for your personal information, with the summer program and district comparisons in mid-July. And also, this is where we send out those reports when they're disaggregated by subgroup. So the immediate reports will not have disaggregation. That will come in July. And again, I just want to reiterate this. All of these scores are embargoed for internal use only until the State Board approves scores in September. And around that time, right before August, the school performance grades will be happening again this year in September. They will release those, but we will get a sneak peek right before that release so you can prepare things. The state will generate, we call it the IRR. That's how it's listed in FIFO, the Internal Results Review. But it is an overview of all the indicators that will be compiled to get your school performance grade at the student group level and the whole school level. So that's just a continuation beyond the immediate DPI reports that we will be providing for you all as we go through. Again, all of these are all on FIFO, and that's kind of some timelines. So back to Serena.
Sure, thank you, Julie. So just some things to consider when looking at these reports that are available. As always, just remember that the test scores are just a snapshot of the student performance on a particular day. We know that teachers teach a lot, many standards throughout the year. We cannot necessarily assess all of those. So major important standards are assessed, and keeping in mind that, you know, it's just a one day. Student might not be feeling well on that day, did a test, and you might be thinking, well, this is how the student is performing. The test is not to be judging whether the student has passed or failed, because like I said, it's just a snapshot in time. And so it's more for us to see, you know, at this point in time, how are the students doing based on the instructions that have been provided? And then also remember that 1 year of data can sometimes be misleading, and especially with some of our tests that are being renormed, trying to compare what this year is producing versus when tests were normed back in 2013, that will not be reliable. So definitely we want to make sure that we're looking at more than 1 year worth of data that is similar in terms of standards that are being assessed. And then also unusual circumstances, we think about the pandemic. Students are just getting back into school. Students are still, some of them still not finding their place back in school since we're now going back in person. So, when you're looking at these reports, looking at the results, remember, it's all about focusing on the academic instruction part of it and to see how are we doing since, coming back into the building, and especially with our tests being renormed. And as always, for a variety of reasons, including low performance rate, comparisons, trying to make that comparison with last year testing results. Remember, most students did not test last year, right? But this year we will find that more students have completed the test. And so trying to compare those results from last year to the results this year, that is not, advisable, but at least we can glean some information from the results this year as to where we're going, moving forward, what more instructions we need to provide, what more resources we need to provide. So those are some things to keep in mind when looking at the results in these reports. So my question to you all, I know some persons said they were familiar with all of the reports. Some persons say that they're not familiar with all of them. So just looking at the few of them that we have touched on, the goal summary, the frequency, the individual student report. So my question to you, which reports are you planning on reviewing in your PLT prior to next year? And then definitely, if you have any questions for us, now is the time for it. You can feel free to unmute yourself to access questions, or you can put it in the chat as well.
Can I ask a question about if we don't hit the 95% this year, what, because I was hoping we would, and I'm just getting a lot of pushback from my VA folks now, especially since we've had an uptick in cases. So I'm worried that we're not going to hit 95. What happens?
So, if I'll take that one, Brian and Serena, if you'd like. ESSA does require the 95% in reading and math for every school group and for the school. So if you do not meet 95%, there may be an impact to the proficiency grade that goes into your school performance grade indicator for the EOG, EOC. I like to use it, frame it around, say if you had 100 kids, 95% of 100 kids is 95. So the feds and state are expecting you to test 95% of those children. If you only test 87%, typically in the past, the proficiency rate would be based with an 87 in the denominator. But with the advent of ESSA, it won't be the 87, it will be the 95. So your denominator is either 95% of the students you should have tested or the number of kids you did test, whichever is greater. So there is a potential impact to your performance score that will then be factored into your school performance grade. There was a message sent out to principals that reiterated that in a principal's message. Maureen, if you just want to send me an email, I can send you that language, or anybody on the line, I can send you that language.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I had a question about FIFO. So Brian, you mentioned that we could request access for our teachers. Is there a way to restrict the files that they see, or they just see everything?
They pretty much see everything. There's really not a way to, I mean, there are ways to restrict who we load it to. A lot of times though, we do load a lot of these reports directly in. So what we would do for one group would have to be done for all groups. So most of the principals who give teachers access, a lot of times it's somebody who's working with the school improvement team, or they're doing something, like a test coordinator role or something intervention or something like that. So it would be in most cases, it would be a pretty special circumstance where teachers have access to that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And so I see in the chat here, person saying that they definitely will be looking at the goal summary report and the individual student report. And yes, by right, these are the reports that tend to have more information for us to look at in terms of thinking about planning for what's going to go on next year in terms of, grouping students. So definitely those are the reports I will definitely pay close attention to. So if you do not have any further questions, and as always, if you have a question, you have Brian, you can send Brian an email, you can send Julie an email also to get further information about these reports, and also who to ask in terms of getting access to these reports. But like we mentioned before, the principals do have access to these in FIFO. And if a particular teacher, as Brian mentioned before, needs a certain access, definitely they will have to speak to the principal to request above baseline access to these reports. We do have our feedback form here. So if you don't mind, you have a phone with you, you can leave us a feedback by scanning here.
I have a quick question, actually, before you take off.
Mhm.
Hi, my name's Liz.
Sure,
I'm
Liz.
a guy over at Nightdale High School. And in past years, I've used some useful reports rising ninth grader reports that are used for scheduling. And they've had some really good recommendations regarding honors level work based on 8th grade data. Are we going to have something like that this year to work with?
That's actually in a similar path to FIFO, except instead of clicking on FIFO, you click on DEERS.
Okay, that's where that is. Got it.
And there's a student roster option, and there should be a rising ninth grade option.
Yeah, because I've gone in there and already pulled some information, and yeah, thank you. No, that makes sense. Sorry, this year has fried my brain.
That's we all understand. No problem. Ask anytime.
Thank you so much.
Of course. So I will take it out at that point. We really appreciate your time and effort today for joining us. We know it's late in the day. We all are a little bit fried, but this is our last office hour of this school year, but we do hope to revamp the office hours for next year. And in that survey, it does ask for topics that you'd be interested in future office hours. Please take a time to do that, because as we schedule out, we want to make sure these are worthwhile and worth your time, and be able to squeeze it in, a 20-minute to a half-hour time frame but can give you some good information. So please let us know what topics you'd like to see next year through this series. Serena, Brian, do you have anything else to add?
That's it, Julie. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'll stop.
Thanks so much. Have a great one.
Thank
You too.
you.
Thanks, Liz.